The morning of June 13th, 1999, began like any other Sunday in the quiet town of Pine Hollow, Ohio. The sun hung low in the clear blue sky, casting warm light across the streets as families slowly made their way toward St. Mark's Church. The old red brick building stood proudly at the end of Maple Street, its white steeple rising above the town like a symbol of comfort and faith. Cars filled the small gravel parking lot while children ran ahead of their parents, their laughter echoing across the churchyard. Inside, the smell of polished wood and old hymn books filled the air, and the soft sound of the organ drifted through the hallways as the choir prepared for the morning service. That Sunday wasn't just another regular service. It was a special day for the church community. 5 children from the town were scheduled to take part in a baptism ceremony that had been planned for weeks. Friends, relatives, and neighbors had gathered to witness the moment. Parents adjusted their children's clothes, straightened tiny ties, and whispered words of encouragement. Cameras were ready, smiles were everywhere, and the atmosphere felt warm and joyful. In a small preparation room behind the sanctuary, the 5 kids waited together, wearing simple white robes that had been provided by the church. The baptism pool itself sat behind the main stage of the sanctuary, partially hidden by wooden panels and a short hallway that led to the preparation room. It wasn't very large, just a tiled pool built decades earlier when the church was first constructed. The water inside reflected the soft yellow lights hanging from the ceiling, creating small ripples that shimmered against the blue tiles. Volunteers moved quietly around the area, making final adjustments and preparing towels while the pastor reviewed his notes for the ceremony. Everything seemed perfectly normal, calm, and routine. In the main hall, the church slowly filled with people. The choir began rehearsing a hymn, their voices echoing gently beneath the tall wooden ceiling beams. Parents of the children sat in the front row, exchanging excited glances as they waited for the ceremony to begin. Some of them leaned over to greet neighbors, while others quietly prayed with their hands folded. From the back hallway, faint sounds of the children talking and laughing could occasionally be heard as they waited for the signal to enter the sanctuary. As the clock reached 10:15 a.m., Pastor Daniel Whitaker stepped up to the pulpit and welcomed the congregation with a warm smile. He spoke about faith, family, and new beginnings, explaining how baptism symbolized a fresh start and a life guided by hope. The room grew quiet as everyone listened, the peaceful atmosphere wrapping around the congregation like a comforting blanket. When the pastor finally turned toward the side hallway and asked for the 5 children to come forward for the ceremony, several parents leaned slightly into the aisle, expecting to see them appear at any second. But the hallway remained strangely empty, and the soft echo of the pastor's words faded into a silence no one immediately understood. Fearful face I hash. At first, no one thought anything was wrong. When the pastor called for the 5 children to come forward and the hallway remained empty, a few people simply assumed there had been a small delay. Sometimes kids got nervous before a baptism, and it wasn't unusual for volunteers to spend a moment calming them down in the preparation room. The pastor glanced toward the side door with a polite smile, giving them a few extra seconds. In the front row, parents leaned forward slightly, expecting to see the children appear at any moment in their white robes. But the seconds stretched into a full minute, and the door still didn't open. The quiet murmur of the congregation slowly began to return as people exchanged puzzled looks. One of the church volunteers quietly slipped into the hallway to check on the children. At first, she walked calmly, expecting to find them waiting in the preparation room. But when she reached the small room behind the sanctuary, she froze in confusion. The door stood slightly open, and the room was completely empty. The white towels were still folded neatly on the bench, and 5 small pairs of shoes sat lined up against the wall. Within minutes, the calm atmosphere inside the church began to shift. 2 more volunteers joined the search, checking the nearby bathrooms, storage closets, and classrooms down the hallway. Their footsteps echoed through the quiet corridors as they called out the children's names one by one. Emily, Josh, David, Lily, Tyler. Their voices carried through the building, but the only response was the faint hum of the air vents and the distant sound of the choir still practicing inside the sanctuary. Back in the main hall, the congregation could sense that something wasn't right. The pastor stepped down from the pulpit as one of the volunteers whispered urgently in his ear. Parents stood up from their seats, their expressions slowly changing from confusion to worry. Within moments, several adults began moving through the church, opening doors, checking classrooms, and searching every corner of the building. The church wasn't very large, and it should have taken only a few minutes to locate the children. But 10 minutes passed, and there was still no sign of them anywhere inside the church. The realization slowly settled over the crowd like a cold shadow. Every door leading outside had remained closed during the service. No one had seen the children walk through the sanctuary or leave the building. Yet somehow, the 5 kids who had been laughing together just minutes earlier had vanished completely. Panic began to spread among the parents as they rushed down the hallways, calling their children's names louder now, their voices trembling as fear slowly replaced hope. Fearful face I hash. Within an hour of the children's disappearance, the quiet streets of Pine Hollow were filled with the flashing red and blue lights of police cars. Officers rushed into St. Mark's Church while worried parents stood outside in small groups, their faces pale with fear. The church was immediately locked down as investigators began searching every inch of the building. Police moved through the sanctuary, classrooms, offices, and storage rooms, opening cabinets, checking behind furniture, and even climbing into the narrow attic space above the ceiling. What had started as a confusing situation was now being treated as a possible abduction. Soon, the search expanded beyond the church walls. Police officers and volunteers spread across the surrounding neighborhood, knocking on doors and asking residents if they had seen anything unusual that morning. Helicopters circled slowly above the town while search teams walked through nearby woods and empty fields. Bloodhounds were brought in to track the children's scent, but the dogs strangely stopped near the back hallway of the church, pacing in circles as if the trail simply vanished there. Inside the church, investigators focused heavily on the baptism area and the small preparation room where the children had last been seen. Detectives carefully examined the tiled floor, the benches, and even the water inside the baptism pool. Divers drained part of the pool to inspect the bottom, searching for anything that might have been hidden or dropped. Every inch of the room was photographed, dusted for fingerprints, and measured. Yet despite the intense investigation, nothing unusual was discovered. Over the next several days, the case quickly spread across national news networks. Reporters arrived in Pine Hollow, broadcasting live from outside the church and interviewing shocked residents who struggled to understand how 5 children could disappear from a crowded building in the middle of a Sunday service. Investigators questioned everyone who had been inside the church that morning: the pastor, the choir members, volunteers, and even the parents themselves. Hundreds of statements were taken, but none of them provided a clear answer. Weeks passed as the investigation continued, but every lead seemed to collapse into silence. There were no ransom calls, no suspicious sightings, and no physical evidence pointing to what had happened. The church building itself had revealed no hidden rooms, secret passages, or signs of forced entry. Slowly, the case that had once filled national headlines began to grow colder, leaving the town of Pine Hollow with a mystery that no one could explain. Fearful face I hash. By the year 2025, St. Mark's Church had begun to show its age. The once bright red bricks had faded to a dull shade, and parts of the roof had started to leak during heavy rainstorms. Inside the building, the wooden floors creaked with every step, and several rooms had begun to smell damp from old plumbing that hadn't been replaced in decades. Church leaders finally agreed that the building needed major repairs if it was going to remain safe for the community. After months of planning, a renovation project was approved, and construction crews were scheduled to begin work that summer. When the workers first arrived, they treated the building like any other routine job. Their plan was simple: repair damaged flooring, replace aging pipes, and modernize some of the older rooms in the church basement. Most of the early work took place in the hallways and storage areas where the wooden floors had become weak over time. The crew used heavy tools to remove old panels and examine the concrete beneath them. Dust filled the air as decades-old boards were pried loose, revealing layers of material that had not been touched since the church was originally built. A few days into the project, the renovation work moved closer to the baptism area behind the sanctuary. The tiled pool had also begun to show signs of wear, and the church board had asked the workers to inspect the plumbing system beneath it. In order to reach the pipes, the crew needed to remove several wooden floor panels located just beside the baptism platform. The work was slow and careful, since the structure beneath the pool was older and more fragile than the rest of the building. As one of the workers pulled away a section of floorboards, he noticed something strange on the concrete surface underneath. Long scratches ran across the dusty floor in thin, uneven lines. At first, they looked like ordinary marks left by heavy construction equipment years earlier. But when the worker wiped away some of the dust with his glove, the pattern became clearer. The scratches formed several straight drag marks that stretched across the floor in the same direction. Curious, the crew began brushing away more dust to follow the lines across the concrete. The marks seemed to lead from the back hallway near the old preparation room, the exact place where the 5 children had once waited before the baptism ceremony in 1999. The scratches continued across the floor until they disappeared beneath the raised platform supporting the baptism pool itself. The workers exchanged uneasy glances as they stared at the marks, realizing that whatever had created them had been dragged slowly across the floor and directly toward the structure beneath the pool. Fearful face I hash. The construction crew stood silently around the exposed section of floor, staring at the strange drag marks that disappeared beneath the baptism platform. At first, some of them assumed the scratches might have been caused by heavy equipment during the church's original construction decades earlier. But the longer they examined the marks, the less sense that explanation made. The lines looked too deliberate, too focused, almost as if something heavy had been pulled slowly across the concrete and guided directly toward the base of the pool. One of the workers grabbed a flashlight and crouched down near the edge of the platform, shining the beam beneath the structure. The light revealed more of the dusty concrete surface, and to their surprise, the drag marks continued underneath the raised area supporting the baptism pool. Curious and slightly uneasy, the crew decided to remove a few more boards to get a better look. The sound of crowbars and power tools echoed through the quiet church as they carefully pried up additional panels. As another section of flooring came loose, something unexpected appeared beneath the dust and debris. A flat piece of metal was embedded into the concrete floor, its edges barely visible beneath years of grime. The shape was unusual, rectangular and slightly rusted, with a small metal ring attached near one side. At first, the workers thought it might be an old maintenance cover for plumbing access, but the more they cleaned around it, the more it looked like a sealed hatch. None of the church leaders who were present had ever mentioned a hatch beneath the baptism area. In fact, several longtime members insisted they had never heard of any underground access point in the building at all. The church had been standing for over 70 years, and many renovations had taken place over time. Yet no records showed anything about a hidden door in that location. The discovery made the atmosphere inside the room suddenly tense. Realizing the discovery might be important, the construction supervisor decided to stop the renovation work immediately and contact local authorities. Within a short time, police officers arrived at the church and examined the strange metal hatch themselves. After carefully clearing away the remaining dust and debris, they confirmed what the workers had suspected. The metal plate was indeed a door built directly into the concrete floor. The officers attached a tool to the rusted ring handle and slowly began to pull, the metal groaning loudly as it resisted years of being sealed shut. Fearful face I hash. With several police officers standing nearby, the rusted hatch slowly lifted open with a long, grinding sound that echoed through the quiet church. Dust fell from the edges of the metal door as it moved, revealing a dark opening beneath the floor. For a moment, no one spoke. The air that rose from the hole felt cold and stale, carrying the damp smell of earth and something much older that had been trapped underground for years. One of the officers stepped closer and aimed his flashlight into the darkness. The beam of light revealed a narrow set of concrete steps leading downward into the ground. The staircase looked old, far older than the modern plumbing systems the workers had expected to find beneath the church. The walls along the opening were rough and unfinished, with patches of brick visible between the concrete layers. It was clear that the passage hadn't been used in a very long time. Dust covered the edges of the stairs, and thin spiderwebs stretched across the corners like fragile curtains that had remained untouched for decades. 2 investigators carefully began making their way down the steps, moving slowly as their flashlights scanned the walls. The narrow staircase seemed to descend deeper than anyone had expected, and the air grew cooler with every step. The silence underground felt heavy and unnatural, broken only by the faint echo of their footsteps against the concrete. When they finally reached the bottom of the staircase, the beam of their flashlights spread across a small underground chamber hidden beneath the church. The room was cramped and dim, its brick walls darkened by moisture and time. Wooden crates were stacked unevenly against one side, many of them broken or partially collapsed. Rusted metal chains hung loosely from hooks embedded in the wall, and several lengths of old rope lay scattered across the dusty floor. It looked like a place that had been used long ago and then abandoned without explanation. Every surface was coated in a thick layer of dust, suggesting that no one had entered the chamber in many years. As investigators continued searching the room, one officer slowly turned his flashlight toward the far wall. There, resting side by side on a narrow wooden shelf, were 5 small plastic bracelets. Their colors had faded with time, but the printed names were still visible beneath the dust. Each bracelet looked identical to the ones given to children during church ceremonies in the late 1990s. When the officer leaned closer and read the names under the beam of his flashlight, the room fell into a heavy silence as the reality of the discovery began to settle in. Fearful face I hash. The moment the investigators read the names on the faded bracelets, the atmosphere inside the underground chamber changed completely. The names matched the 5 children who had vanished from St. Mark's Church back in 1999. Emily Carter, Josh Miller, David Hayes, Lily Grant, and Tyler Brooks. For a few seconds, no one spoke. The officers simply stared at the small plastic bands resting on the dusty wooden shelf, trying to understand how something connected to a decades-old missing persons case could be sitting in a hidden room beneath the very building where the children had disappeared. Within hours, the entire church was sealed off as an official crime scene. Police tape surrounded the building, and investigators began carefully documenting every inch of the underground chamber. Forensic teams arrived with cameras, evidence bags, and specialized lights designed to detect traces that might have been missed for years. The narrow staircase, the rusted chains, the wooden crates, and even the floor of the chamber were examined piece by piece. Every object was photographed and catalogued, as detectives tried to reconstruct what might have happened beneath the church all those years ago. News of the discovery spread through Pine Hollow faster than anyone expected. Residents who had grown up hearing about the mysterious disappearance suddenly found themselves reliving the fear and confusion that had once gripped the town. News trucks returned to the same church parking lot that had been filled with reporters 26 years earlier. Cameras pointed toward the red brick building while journalists spoke about the shocking discovery hidden beneath the baptism pool. Many longtime residents began asking the same chilling questions. If this underground chamber had existed all along, how had it remained hidden for so many years? The church had hosted hundreds of services, repairs, and community events since 1999. Yet somehow, no one had ever noticed the hatch beneath the floor or the staircase leading down into the darkness. Even the original building plans found in the church archives made no mention of an underground room beneath the baptism area. Detectives also began revisiting the old case files, reviewing every witness statement and piece of evidence from that day in 1999. The drag marks discovered during the renovation now seemed to suggest that something, or someone, had been pulled across the floor toward the hidden hatch. But the biggest mystery remained unanswered. If the chamber had been beneath the church the entire time, hidden just below the place where the congregation gathered every Sunday, then the truth about what happened that morning might have been buried beneath their feet all along. Fearful face I hash. Even after the shocking discovery beneath St. Mark's Church, the mystery of Pine Hollow remains far from solved. The hidden chamber raised more questions than answers, leaving investigators struggling to piece together what truly happened on that quiet Sunday morning in 1999. For the families of the 5 children, the pain that had lived in their hearts for 26 long years suddenly returned, stronger than ever. The small bracelets found in the chamber proved one terrifying truth. The secret of that day had never left the church. Today, the old red brick building still stands at the end of Maple Street, but the town no longer sees it the same way. The place that once symbolized faith and safety now carries a shadow of unanswered questions. Residents often say that when the church lights go out at night, the silence around the building feels heavier than before, as if the walls themselves are hiding a story no one fully understands. Investigators continue to examine the chamber, hoping that one overlooked detail might finally reveal the truth. But until that day comes, the people of Pine Hollow are left wondering about the events that unfolded beneath their feet for more than 2 decades. Because sometimes, the most terrifying mysteries are not the ones that disappear. They are the ones that were hidden right in front of us all along.
If you liked this video, don't forget to hit that like button, share it with your friends, and drop your thoughts in the comments below. Most importantly, subscribe and hit the bell icon so the next secret finds you first.